welcome to episode 8 of the Entropy Podcast. I'm your host, Francis Gorman, and I'm joined today by Michael Freeman, Head of Threat Intelligence for Armis. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
It's great to have you on, Michael. Before we talk about your current position, I'd like to explore a little bit of your past. You've done some really fascinating stuff over the years. You worked for American intelligence agencies, and set up your own company, which led you on your current journey. Can you give me a flavor of your journey to date through the land of technology, cybersecurity, and business?
It's not a normal path that most people take. Basically, one born out of curiosity more than anything. My original goal was to go into the U.S. military. Go into the special forces route was my a goal. It was what I grew up, planning on doing. But it was one of those things where when I get my hands on anything, I was taking it apart, figuring out how it worked, putting it back together, trying to make it better, trying to make it do things it's not supposed to do. And long story short, that led to playing around with computers at a really young age, trying to figure out how programs work, playing around with mainframes at my dad's military base, things I probably shouldn't have touched to begin with. But it kind of evolved from there. Next thing I know, I was doing some work as a cryptographer, more on the cryptanalysis side, and I was finding it's much easier to attack the implementation of cryptography or even the system surrounding it than it was the actual crypto system itself. That kind of led me from, um, you know, going figuring out how things work to figuring out how to break things, and that led me into the space of doing more offensive side of work. Did some put together a team, did DEF CON CTF way back in the very early days of DEF CON, and it changed my government career at that point.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the cryptographic space, I can't resist myself now asking you about post quantum and some of your thoughts there before we jump into the journey again.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting journey. It's one of those things that everybody is definitely concerned about, and rightfully so. It's something that's going to be inevitable, but we don't know when. And that's the key thing. We were taking a look at four eight qubit quantum computers back in the late '90s, and thinking that it's going to be an evolution that's going to happen very quickly. But we're looking at back in the '90s, and the evolution of quantum computing really hasn't taken off to the point we thought it was going to, but it's definitely making leaps and bounds. It's definitely something where we're seeing where okay, it's on the precipice, and it's right there close to the point where post quantum computing world for designing and building crypto systems is now taking up higher priority, and rightfully so. It just we don't know when it's going to happen now.
And that's the problem, isn't it? We don't know when
It
it's going to
is.
happen, but we know it's more than likely going to happen based on the current trajectory. Michael, I want to ask you a little bit about CTCI. You helped co-found that company. Something that I found fascinating when I was doing a little bit of background research on you is you saw 1,000 attacks that no one else was seeing, and some of them 3 to 6 months before CISA picked them up. Can you explain to me one, how you came across the concept to take this approach, two, how you were so far ahead of the game, and three, what did you learn?
Yeah, it came about. I was doing some work for a think tank, and this think tank primarily only does work for intelligence agencies, groups like DARPA, IARPA, and a little bit for NASA. And we were doing some extremely cutting edge work for the customers. It was a situation where due to some life changes, I had an opportunity to go from the think tank world to the Fortune 100 company. It was a company that had been trying to recruit me for quite a while. They were standing up with cybersecurity from the ground up. They had nothing in place. It literally is a Fortune 100 company with one guy that was in charge of cybersecurity, and it was just one guy doing all cybersecurity. The premise was is there was a number of new teams that needed to be stood up. Your vulnerability management team, incident response, forensics, security operations, you name it. And as I was helping set up these teams, I started taking a look at some of the key problems we really had. And I always try to break things back to this most core element of whatever it is we're trying to do. And I would look and say, okay, we're buying all these tools imaginable. We're buying all the threat feeds imaginable you can get. and it's only covering a small little component of what actually I saw was true value that we really needed. When I looked at the vulnerability management team, and I said, look, you know, let's take a look at the vulnerabilities of the systems we at least knew about. And then we came back with something like 28 million vulnerabilities in aggregate. And looking at the criticals and highs, there's a little over 6 million criticals and highs. But as I took a look at the actual true vulnerabilities, and I said, we have a 2-year plan just to address the criticals and highs, nothing else below that. But I knew several threat actors were actually targeting the 4s, 5s, and 6 on the the CVEs that we were exposed to. And I, looked at the team and said, "What's our plan for this?" And they said, "Well, we're not going to get to these. It's not a priority." Another problem I had is when I took a look at all the threat intelligence feeds we were paying for, and we had paid quite a bit for some of these feeds. It was a lot of false positives. When I looked at the numbers, it's close to 900 per one false positive rate. We had issues with them expiring IOCs and everything else like that. And look, what are we missing here? That's a question I ask myself when I'm trying to tackle any type of a problem here. Is most important thing is the way you ask the question, the type of question you ask, and the way you think about the question. So I realize that everybody is focused, in my opinion, on a very right of boom concept, which is basically, in the military terms, it's already happened, and the issue's already happened. This is really far after that. So I looked at it and said, what are we missing? And said, we're missing the left of boom, the very proactive nature of things. And so what I did is I said, before I came on board to this Fortune 100 company, I still own the IP of all the work I was doing for the think tank. That's the nature of the type of work we're doing. So I looked at it and said, you know what? I have some technologies that I've created for the think tank and previous careers uh, doing consulting work for other agencies, things like that I still own the IP for. Let me take the typical intelligence life cycle, which we were not doing. We were basically trying to collect all the intel we could, search for bad things, and then try to act upon it. But the typical intelligence life cycle starts with a question. And to us, I said, what's the question that we need to focus on? And that, to me, was what are vulnerabilities that threat actors are using right now or attempting to use in the near future? So what I did is I took a look at my technologies I've created and said, actually, 3 separate technologies can help me individually uh, answer that parts of those questions, but they can also work together, help each other refine and identify areas that would make me answer the question much faster. So I put together this technology stack that uses a lot of really unique approaches. Some of them are actually very old school approaches that we have had in the industry for quite a long time, but just in a unique, different way. And putting this together, I started providing this intel to a guy that would eventually be my co-founder with CTCI, but he ran the security operations team. And he's basically building really unique AI pipeline, things like that to help find bad and something like 68 terabytes of data a day. Uh, Eventually, he came back to me. He's like, the data you're giving us we're getting it way before anybody else sees this. Sometimes up to a year before we actually see it being hit in our environment. How are you doing this? So I showed him what we did and how we did it. And long story short, we had a vendor in that we bought a new technology from, and the CEO of that company was also a private investor himself. Took a look at what we did, and with just a quick handshake deal, he wired me a little bit of money to help proof out the concept a little bit more. Showcased it to a couple of CISOs, friends of his, and basically said, let's start up a company. And we at this Fortune 100 company, after you're there for 5 years, you get lifetime access to buy their product at a substantial discount. I had already reached that point. My co-founder's like, well, I've got like 4 more months to go before I hit that point. So we stayed on for another 4 more months, and got the legal everything stood up for the new company CTCI, and we went and launched it. We went and launched it at RSA, showcased to some friends. We had a lot of friends lined up to have breakfast and lunch and coffee with us. And the very first meeting was to a friend of ours, and he tried to buy the company immediately. He's like, "I need this right now." His company did threat intel. took a look at what we did, compared our data to his, and like we didn't even have a customer yet at this point. We had a customer 3 hours later. We went to meet with another friend of ours, and he literally pulled out $1 on the spot, said, "Okay, here's my down payment, and I'll send you a contract." So that's, yeah, we looked at it and go, "Okay, it's definitely a business idea that we have something here," and we took off like running with it.
That's incredible, Michael. And I suppose it's the you don't know you have value till other people start buying in, and then when that happens, it's magic. Is there anything you found months before anyone else that you went, oh, this is a bad one?
Quite a few things we find. One of our processes, without divulging too much, is identifying when certain types of vulnerabilities are being fixed within certain technologies or software libraries, wherever the case may be. And we had a process that flagged for us of a potential issue coming along and a very critical software library. We looked at it and go, this could be bad. At the time, we didn't have like Armis's reach when it comes to identifying, how big this particular type of technology would be within other technologies. But we knew enough about a lot of technologies to go, I think this software library is used in a lot of things. And that was a log4j issue. We caught that 2 months early, actually. We actually caught it when it was being discussed amongst some of the developers, when a couple other people had found the patch and said, or not the patch, but the bug itself, and said, I think this might be bad. Our intelligence collections picked up on it, ranked and categorized it, and said, this is a potential issue. So we started looking at it and go, actually, this is quite easy to exploit. And we talked to a couple of our customers and found out, yes, they definitely have a lot of Log4j and a lot of their technology stacks. And so when the issue finally became known publicly, we had been on the very forefront of identifying the evolution of the attacks as they were happening, because some of the bug fixes or the patches weren't fully working the way they needed to. Letting people know here's the variations of the attacks as they're evolving, because we have some unique capabilities to help us identify that. At the time, a lot of national certs around the world are basically linking to our LinkedIn because we're posting all the information almost daily, sometimes 3 to 4 times a day, as we find new components and new evolutions of the attacks and how they were evolving. So that was a key one that we caught. Another one, as we were testing out the concept of it when we were still at the Fortune 100 company, we had a friend of ours that was at a extremely large defense contractor, and we started seeing some intelligence chatter that was pointing out to something that looked like it's going to be really, really bad issue coming up. We took a look at, and we got our hands on the exploit code, tested it out, and said, yeah, this is going to be very bad. And that was something that eventually became known as Blue Keep. But we let our friend at the defense contractor, because we use Shodan and Census to identify who's exposed to the internet, and this company kept popping up, and we're like, oh, this is going to be bad. We need to let our friend over there know. He took action on 10 days earlier than what everybody else did, and let us know a couple weeks later that that 10-day heads up saved them what would have been close to $100 million breach if they would have been compromised. Because 10 days after we notified them, they started seeing the hits. But thankfully, they were have mitigating controls in place before that happened.
That's intelligence worth having right there. €100 million saved. I hope you had a
Yes.
percentage clawback on early guidance. I suppose when I think about this, you're talking about identification of things months before they're known in the wider ether, but somebody knows about them. What does that mean in terms of your perspective for the modern world, for elections, for bedding in bad actors into companies and lying silent for we're in a very unstable geopolitical climate at the moment. What's your perspective there? What does this mean for the wider technology landscape that we all rely on so heavily in our day to day lives?
It's a good question. Especially with the advent of large language models and the ability for threat actors to use those in such a way that allows them to uh, really compound the return on investment for themselves. Uh, in the past, if I was going to target if I have a target that I'm going after, it's a long, drawn out process. Usually, I'm spending a lot of time mapping out what the infrastructure looks like, how the people operate, what are the kind of operational security flaws going to look like, what technology stacks are going to be using, how am I going to gain access, how am I going to pivot throughout the environment without getting caught. Uh, Low and slow method was a very effective approach to it. Sometimes I'd look at it and go, okay, if I can get into this step, I'm going to have to figure out a vulnerability within this type of technology for me to be able to move around because possibly I don't have one right now. So I'm going to have to, spend the time later to find one. I don't want to use one that's widely known because most likely I'm going to get myself caught by doing that. So using AI can really help fill in those gaps very quickly. And I've seen that happening now. I've been able to get my hands on some LLMs that some threat actors are developing that have provided very unique capabilities for them. One in particular was that stood out for me as after you've compromised an environment, you've stolen, Slack channel conversations, you've got on their wiki and stolen a bunch of information, you compromise an email server, and you steal a bunch of emails. You can put this into a database with the front end with FurRag and use the LLM on it to actually identify certain individuals within that company that would be very susceptible to blackmail because maybe a comptroller identified some financial issues, raised it up with the CFO, and the CFO said, "Oh, don't worry about that. Well, it's not a problem," but it actually is. So therefore, you just had the LLM can actually help identify two potential people that you can blackmail in that environment, saying, actually based upon this law, you broke this law. I'm gonna get let the authorities know unless you pay me, $2,000 in Bitcoin or something like that. So I've definitely seen, the evolution of LLMs really help drive the threat actors and some of the unique tools I'm seeing right now. But on the flip side, we're identifying ways we can also use the same types of technologies to actually make ourselves even more secure. There's some new capabilities that came out last week where you can put a couple LLM or put an LLM in front of not an LLM, I'm sorry. Can't remember the name of the technology off the top of my head, but basically it's a tool set that helps you uh, reverse engineer malware much faster and easier using LLMs. So that's in an evolution we're seeing. We use AI quite extensively in our processes, and we can now do the work of 200 to 300 people with one person now. And we've been doing that. We did that with CTCI, and we're really taking that capability here at Armis. I think it's going to be for a while now an AI arms race where people, threat actors and defenders are going to use AI in different ways to try to one up each other. The combination of that will be those who can actually understand their environment better than the other person will be the winner. So whether that's going to be, the person doing the offensive work, if they're able to use AI and understand your environment much better than you can, then they're going to be the winner of it. Likewise, if you're the defender and you can use AI to understand all your assets, where they are, what the context is around them, what kind of controls you have in place, you're going to be able to beat out the attacker that way. So that's where the evolution of it's going to go, I think.
I think that's a really key point. I had Francesco Cipollone on last week. He's the CEO and founder of Phoenix Security, and he was talking about the very similar thing that the mean time to attack now with an LLM is minutes with the right makeup. And the point he was trying to get across is if you can understand the attack surface of an environment, then leverage an intelligence, be it an LLM or whatever you have, to exploit that vulnerability, you have an upper hand straight away. And as he was talking, he was saying, like, you talked earlier about all of these critical vulnerabilities and high vulnerabilities that you identified. and the amount of time it takes an organization to patch those and to rectify them. So now we're in this nuanced situation where the time to attack versus the time to patch are completely at odds with each other by months, if not years in some places. So that's going to create a whole new way of leveraging these technologies to really drive into the exploitation front. So that knowing your environment, and I think this is probably where Armis comes in as well as having some of those capabilities and others on the market to really understand your assets and then rank stack them in terms of exposure based on how close they are to your perimeter, where they may have API access to back end systems that are public facing or whatever. Um, I think that's definitely going to be a focus area for organizations in the next couple of months and years. I know it's already a big piece, but I think it's going to really come to light that your vulnerabilities and your ability to patch those vulnerabilities in a data driven way is going to be key to keeping your perimeter safe.
Yes, it's going to be key. It's when we step back and look at it and go back to the fundamental problems of it. You look at it and go, like, what's the problems you really truly have is if you can't see what you have, you can't protect it, and that's when that really hit home for me when I was at the Fortune 100 company. I asked one of the teams, like, let me know how many websites we have, how many externally facing websites we have. And they came back to me after honestly about 6 weeks, using every tool they could find 2,300 plus websites that they knew about. So I said, yeah, I think there's more because I remember stumbling on more at times just poking around. And at the time, there was another company around that had been acquired by Recorded Future. A friend of mine ran, and so I reached out to him. I said, hey, can I use some of your tool sets, DNS tool sets, to help me find all the websites we had? And we did, and it took about a week. And we came back, we had over 18,000 websites that we didn't actually know about. A lot of them were spun up by marketing for certain campaigns that they were doing on old WordPress servers that were exposed to the internet and attached to our network. We just had no clue they existed. And that was to me a big eye opening because in my past careers, we knew all of our assets were at. We knew exactly where they were at. So to have this view, it was eye opening to me. And go, is this a really big problem that everybody has? And when I started speaking to friends in the industry and stuff, yeah, we have no clue what assets we have. We take a look at what we think our crown jewels are, some of the technologies that supports that, and we look at all the logs that we can get our hands on and search through. So knowing that, I looked at it and go, that's going to be a big problem for the industry as a whole, for everybody, and that's one of the key things we looked at when we were being approached to sell CTCI. Is we had other threat intel companies trying to acquire us. We had other consulting firms trying to acquire us, and we looked at it and said, where's the real problems at? Because we want to solve problems. We don't want you know to go do something for a couple of years where it's nice to do, but we really want to tackle very hard problems that are back to the fundamentals, and that was the key driver for us looking at Armis as being acquired. So, like I said, going back to the basics is going to be key for everybody in the future. The more and more technologies and AI you try to throw on things, you're going to get lost in the weeds. I think if you're putting AI in the right key areas and it's a very well thought out approach to what you're doing to help you leverage things instead of trying to solve the problems for you is where it's going to be.
And I think there is that data saturation problem that humans face. You lift the hood on the new tool that you've plugged in, and all of a sudden you've got millions and millions of vulnerabilities or issues,
Yes.
and you just don't know where to start. Like where do I size it? And that's where really understanding your environment becomes a key part of that picture. So maybe there's another startup there in the background, around visualization of one's environment and then backing the assets off it. Yeah, it's definitely another problem. Another problem, I call it. There seems to be so many problems at the moment. This is just another one. Michael, I want to talk a little bit maybe about the political landscape that we're in at the moment. You've obviously got a background in intelligence, in government, etc. we're seeing shifts to the far right. We're seeing technology playing a huge role in that in different areas. Have you got a perspective on modern elections and how susceptible people are to underlying thematics that are being driven by actors with a different agenda than maybe in the public interest?
When it comes to election security, I look at it in two different ways. There is a technology aspect of things, and we were engaged quite heavily in the last election with a lot of different counties and cities to help make sure that their elections were ran securely. And definitely say that there has been a lot of changes, especially here in the United States, about election security from that front, and we're very, very good is the best way to put it. They did there every agency or county or city that we worked with had taken really great steps to actually secure their election technologies and the processes. So that was actually good to see that happening because the previous elections, I definitely saw lots of issues that I'm like, okay, this is actually kind of bad. But there was a lot of good on that front. Now, when it comes to uh, using methods of persuasion or you know elicitation, whatever the case may be, to drive the emotional factor of voters is definitely something that is it's all countries do it to each other. You know, we've been doing it for a very long time. Other people have been trying to do it for us in a much just equally long time. Everybody does it. That's compounded now that with social media. Social media has made it so simple to do and so cheap to do. In the past, prior to social media trying to influence outcomes of an election was boots on the ground, a lot of financial and other type of resources to actually find that key components and factors such as evolving the culture to actually change that to happen to get a better outcome for you as a country to influence another country's elections. Now with social media and using technology in that way has made it much, much, much more simpler. Uh, that is, that was definitely a big concern of mine. I have seen how that has been evolving greatly, and uh, with the short attention spans that people have, the what I say is the inability to do first and second order thinking, where they can actually see something, go, okay, let me think about this. The news says this. What is this news? How is this news article being written to influence me? Looking at it and go, okay, well, I can see by the way they state this, it's it's driving certain uh, reactions out of me to think it this way in the way that they want me to think. But let me look at other sources of this, and let me analyze what other sources are saying, and say, look, okay, this source says this source, five of these sources say this one source says this, but when you look at it and go, okay, most of these articles are written the exact same way, almost saying the same thing verbatim, but this other article over here says maybe something new that I didn't know. Maybe it's seen it including certain information that happened that was left out by these other articles. Oh, and people just don't take the time and understanding to do that, so it leads them to be very susceptible to it. Any type of influence, and human beings are easy to influence to be in reality, but seeing AI, not just AI, but using AI, using social media to really drive that change is really a big factor. With changes that I've seen, also, it's not as easy for some groups of people to be as influenced as they used to be in the past too. Now that certain aspects of social media has changed, new types of social media has came out, new types of channels have come out. It's now to the point where one group who was very susceptible now have the ability to look at things a little bit more openly and then analyze things a little bit better and say, well, actually, no, this is not what I thought it was. I can see the second order effects of this of what this particular political maybe proposed changes could potentially happen to me, how it would impact me, my children, things like that. I think this through a little bit better. So I am seeing that happening more and more now because people have really, I think, I've gotten a little bit of fatigue with social media. Telling them this is how you should identify, this is how you should work and think. People kind of been stepping back from that and going, "Yeah, I don't think so, not so much, because the outcomes for me are not what I expected them to be." Uh, so it is unique. I mean, it is something where it's it's easy to do, but it's also having a different effect longer term, where it is pushing people to say, this is you know, I don't like people thinking for me or an algorithm thinking for me. I want to look and see, start thinking for myself. So I am seeing a shift in that too. So it's interesting to see this play out because we've never really seen this play out like this before.
Yeah, it is. It is an interesting dynamic. I had Louise McCormick on a couple of weeks ago talking ethical AI, and the one of the things that she said in it that really struck home was once you give your child a smartphone, you lose control of the type of person they're going to become. And I thought it was a
Yes,
stark. It gave me a stark image of God, that's a powerful sentiment, and I think we're seeing some of that materialize in the real world. But now with the power of AI and generative AI and large language models hopping on the back of that, and people using those as well to start doing a lot of the cognitive process they would have had to do themselves beforehand. I do worry that we're making ourselves mentally more susceptible to being swayed in different directions. So it's definitely a watch space of mine. Even in companies that we weaken our human resilience by having an over reliance
hmm
on technologies to do some of the key thinking for us, which is a key part of our makeup and our decision making and our leadership process.
exactly. There was an article, a paper just published. I want to say last week, examining just that, where they task intelligence people, people who work in the intelligence space, um, to use AI for a few months and analyze the quality of their work versus what they would be doing, and it was an evolution that everybody took. You start using AI to help you speed up some of your tasks, help me refine this paper a little bit better. To okay, run this couple of tasks for me so I don't have to do that. And what they found was is the more you used it, for most people, not everybody, but the more you used it, the less critical thinking you're actually doing. And these are very highly trained, very skilled intelligence analysts that were going through this process, and we were finding out very, through this paper very quickly. And most of us were looking and go, yeah, actually, I'm becoming way too over reliant on letting AI do the critical thinking processes for me. And when I was building the technology stack behind CTCI, that was something I was very cautious of doing to make sure that it's not doing the critical thinking for me. It's augmenting my processes and giving me great leverage is what I was focusing on. I could see very simply, very easily, it could have gotten down that road where it's doing a lot of critical thinking for me or my analysts, and that was just not something that I was, willing to do. I always wanted to make sure the human was in the loop. Nothing could go be published until validation was actually done, verification of every step was actually completed correctly, and that was a driver of mine. Uh, I was I last year had it was a lunch with the CTO of the CEI, and that was a topic that came up that we were taking a look at. How can we actually use AI to help the analysts not make the decisions for them, but actually help them challenge them. And just in passing, I said, here's an idea that I came up with for my tech with CTCI to help challenge the analyst is when you put together a report and say this is the probabilities, this is what we're seeing, you can put that into a trained LLM that can actually challenge you and say, did you think about this? Did what are the second order thinking process that happens if you make this recommendation? So I built that as a, what would that be like to help that happen? And so I built an LLM that actually does that for me. So whenever before we publish something on Armis now, it actually goes through that process and say, okay, before you write this report about this threat actor and these TTPs and stuff like that, are you sure and have you validated that this particular TTP is used this way incorrectly, and are you sure these detection methods actually work? And it actually goes through the process and say we've highlighted some of the, highlight some of the detection rules you've written may or may not work in this context. Have you thought about that? So it does some unique challenges for us to help us think better instead of the thinking for us. And that's an area I definitely want to explore more because, like you said, it's going to be a problem where it does the critical thinking for us. And
Yeah, that's a really key insight that you've built into the tool because does this mitigation or this detection method work in your environment? We know it works
right,
in the environment that we validated it in, but does it work in your environment with all of your nuances and customization that you've done? So yeah, that's a really key, and that's actually a brilliant example of computer says no. You really need to actually we're saying that this works, but have we validated that it works? Which is
yeah.
a really key part of it. Look, Michael, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I think that flew. I think we're 36 minutes or so already. So really nice to have you on. And hopefully maybe we can catch up in the future when you've seen a bit more of the Armis capabilities bed in, and what the next new tool is going to look like.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been great.
Thanks a million.